listeners to Snippit Sports Science Podcast, sponsored by eliteform.com and our listeners on patreon.com/snippetscience. Now, one resource we have for providing the highest quality content we have is that the platforms we use collect some statistics on our listeners. Of course, as everyone knows, all these companies collect tons of statistics on all of our digital behavior. And apparently, you all love dogs. Even more so than sports or science, our listeners are subscribed to dog-themed content. Shockingly, I also love dogs. So when my nature newsletter came across in my email, I subscribed to the Nature email newsletter. I highly recommend it to everyone. Nature is one of the highest rated scientific journals out there. Between Nature and Science, they're definitely number 1 and number 2. So I get a little email newsletter from Nature Publishing pretty much every day that shows me their articles. And there was one that popped up and it's been sitting in my folders ever since, and I'd like to get into that today. The title is a little bit of a spoiler, as Nature scientific reports often are. The title here is Dog Owners Are More Likely to Meet Physical Activity Guidelines Than People Without a Dog. An investigation of the association between dog ownership and physical activity levels in a UK community. This is an article by Carri Westgarth and colleagues from University of Liverpool and Lancaster University, as well as Hayley E from University of Western Australia. As this is a Nature publication, we can pretty much assume that it's going to be an excellent piece of work, and so I'm just going to jump straight into it. The researchers write that dog ownership is a public health interest due to the potential to promote health-enhancing physical activity and improved cardiovascular outcomes. The evidence suggests that dog ownership is associated with lower risk of death and a lower risk of cardiovascular conditions, at least in single-person households, where the participant may be more highly obligated to dog walk. It is recommended that adults undertake at least 150 minutes of moderate physical intensity physical activity per week, but this is achieved by only 66% of men and 58% of women. A 2013 review concluded considerable evidence that dog owners were more physically active than people without a dog, with small to moderate effect sizes. However, findings from some studies have been inconsistent, mainly because some owners do not walk with their dog. Nevertheless, considering the number of households that own dogs, in the UK it's 24%, whereas in the United States it's 48% and 39% of Australia, which covers the majority of our audience. Considering the number of households that own dogs, even small effects might contribute to considerable additional physical activity at the population level. Thus, considering the number of households that own dogs, even small effect sizes might contribute to considerable additional physical activity at the population level, provided, of course, that the dogs are actually walked. The different types of exercise that dog owners and non-dog owners report participating in requires investigation. Dog walking is reported to be only physical activity for some owners, but for others it limits other activity, potentially higher intensity, as there are only so many hours in the day, and the dog takes priority. However, there is some evidence that participation in other types of moderate to vigorous physical activity is also greater in dog owners than non-dog owners. It is also not known what proportion of dog walking is undertaken for recreational reasons and what proportion is dispersed practice, such as primarily transport-related activity, such as walking to a local shop, to drop and pick up from school, or to a workplace. Anecdotally, other physical activities with a dog are also popular, such as jogging or cycling, but it is not known how common they are. It is difficult to compare dog walking rates directly between countries, as study designs and measures vary, but United Kingdom owners potentially participate in more dog walking than North America and Australia due to social and climatic differences. Daily walking of dogs is the accepted social expectation in the UK, with this occurring for 78% of dogs in a UK study. A common reason reported by United States dog owners for not walking their dogs was that the dog self-exercised or was an outside dog, 43%. And warm climates in Australia may have a similar effect. In contrast, only 4% of pet dogs in a UK community slept outside. Dog owners are also more highly motivated to walk in bad weather than their non-dog owning counterparts, which could be advantageous for dog owners' physical activity levels, given the often cool and wet weather in the UK. Specific UK research has focused on older adults, pregnant women, children, and adolescents. To the author's knowledge, no studies have investigated the association between dog ownership and physical activity in general adult population, and this study aims to fill the gap. This will allow a cross-country comparisons and contribute to the development of robust intervention strategies to promote dog walking across different countries. Therefore, the first aim of this study was to compare the physical activity of dog owners from UK population with people that do not own a dog. The authors claim that this study is superior to those previously conducted on dog walking in a number of ways. It uses both self-report and objective measures of physical activity, as people have a tendency to over-report physical activity on surveys. Research often focuses on one participant per household, potentially biased towards the person with the most involvement in dog care, inflating the impact of dogs. In contrast, this study attempted to recruit and assess the physical activity of all household members, including children. Another unique aspect of this study was that all participants resided in the same community and thus had access to the same neighborhood environment for walking. Another unique aspect of this study was that all the participants resided in the same community and thus had access to the same neighborhood environment for walking, known to influence activity levels, although perhaps only in dog owners. Therefore, this is the first study of dog ownership to truly account for perceived differences in physical activity that may actually be attributed to dog owners living in different environments to people without a dog. So the researchers received responses from 385 households with 694 participants. The total household response rate was about 30% of the study area of 1,280 households. Socio-demographic descriptors of the adult participants were given in the tables. Feel free to open up the article. Highly recommend that as always, and have a look at the table. There's quite a few pretty excellent tables in here for you to have a look at. There were slightly more female than male participants, and the participants were mainly middle-aged or older adults. Dog owners were significantly younger, more likely to work, and had higher household gross income, slightly different education patterns, and had higher self-rated health, all with a p-value of less than 0.05. Looking at the dog-related physical activity, the dog owners walked with their dogs a median of 7 times per week, with a range of 0 to 32 times per week, and for a median of 220 minutes per week. The range there was 0 to 1,800 minutes per week. However, 18 people, about 10% of the participants, who owned a dog reported 0 minutes of walking with their dog. Excluding these non-dog walkers, increased the median time spent for dog walking for dog walkers to 250 minutes per week. Dog walking was mostly done for recreation, health, and fitness, with a median of 210 minutes per week, whereas walking for transportation had a median of 0 minutes. 33 of the dog owners, nearly 20%, reported walking their dogs for transport, 10 reported jogging with their dogs, and 4 reported cycling with their dogs. Overall, dog owners spent a median of about 250 minutes per week participating in physical activity with their dogs. 64% of dog owners met the physical activity guidelines through their dog walking alone, about 70% of the dog walkers. It's also worth noting that non-dog walkers had very low levels of physical activity. Only about 30% of non-dog walkers met physical activity guidelines, compared with over 80% of all dog owners and 88% of dog walkers, as well as 62% of non-dog owners. It is also worth noting that non-dog walkers had very low levels of physical activity, with only about 30% of non-dog walkers meeting physical activity guidelines, compared with over 80% of all dog owners and 88% of dog walkers. Walking for recreation contributed a median of 70% of total physical activity for dog owners, compared to only 30% for those without a dog. Dog owners were also more likely to report jogging or running without a dog, and less likely to report yoga or Pilates. Looking at the unadjusted accelerometry findings, dog walkers measured 2,000 more steps and 13 more minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity per day compared to non-owners. With the 6 dog owners who reported walking with their dogs some days but not others, a mean 3,000 extra steps per day were reported on dog walking days. The addition of weight status and perceived general health made very little difference. The odds of walking for transport was lower in dog owners compared to non-dog owners, but if walking for transport occurred, there was no difference in the duration per week between non-dog owners and dog owners. Dog owners were 14 times more likely than non-owners to walk for recreation, and amongst people who walked for recreation, dog owners also walked about 40% more minutes per week. In contrast, there was no evidence that participation in other moderate to vigorous physical activities were more or less likely in dog owners, nor of longer or shorter duration per week if they were undertaken. Overall, the odds of dog owners meeting current physical activity guidelines of 150 minutes per week was 4 times greater than non-dog owners. This represents an absolute difference of about 90% of dog owners achieving 150 minutes per week compared to only 60% of non-dog owners. In all but 2 cases, the self-report and objective measures provided the same outcome in terms of meeting guidelines. 2 participants met guidelines by self-report but not accelerometry, 20 met guidelines by both measures, and 6 did not meet guidelines by accelerometry or self-report. Looking at dog-related physical activity in children, it was found that 2 out of the 10 dog-owning children reported never walking with their dog. Again, walking for transport was less common than walking for recreation, with a median of 0 minutes per week for transportation, 85 minutes for recreation, and 105 minutes per week in total. Children walk their dogs a minimum of 2 times during the week for about 40 minutes total, and 1 time at the weekend for 45 minutes. 3 out of 10 of the children reported running or jogging with their dog. Free time unstructured physical activity, playing, with the dog by children was common, with a median of 200 minutes per week spent in this activity. 60 minutes of playtime was inside the house, and 65 minutes was in the yard or garden. Dog-owning children reported 78 more minutes per week walking with recreation, and 285 more minutes per week walking than non-dog-owning children. Free time unstructured physical activity was also 260 minutes higher than dog-owning children. That's some pretty remarkable data on the physical activity in children. At first, it doesn't seem like too much with less than 2 hours of additional walking per week, but then when you account for the playtime, which could be very vigorous playtime, I remember all this. It's not just like throwing a frisbee. I remember when I was a kid, I was growing up, and this brings back a lot of memories of when I was growing up, and apparently what's considered a rural farmland or a ranch, we actually had basically an entire dog pack. When I was growing up, we had at least 4 dogs. I can't even keep track of them. But all the playing was actually wrestling with the dogs. And you got to imagine when you're a little kid, play wrestling with a dog, you're basically play fighting a small bear. It's about the same size as you know? So it can be quite vigorous playtime. And these kids are having greater than 3 hours per week doing that. And more substantially, compared to the non-dog owning children, these kids were having nearly, 4 to 5 hours more walking and playtime. And that's just an incredible impact on the child. A lot of people, I think, now are struggling to, how do we get the children off of screens and how do we get them actually outside and playing and moving? Possibly a great intervention for that is just owning a dog, which has loads of other benefits otherwise. And they did say in the article here that there were 2 children that didn't walk the dog. That's just irresponsible parenting. You've got an excellent opportunity to teach your children that this is a dog, this is a pet that you need to care for, and they need exercise for their survival, for their fitness, for their health. And that then translates into their own knowledge about themselves and how mammals work. Mammals need physical activity for their health. And so by teaching them responsibility to provide physical activity for their dog, they better learn to provide physical activity for themselves as well. I remember in my own childhood, just besides the playtime, as I got older, that probably transitioned more into just walking the dogs and bringing the dogs for runs as well. And dogs are excellent on a run. I remember there's quite a spectrum of what dogs are able to do, because we had the 4 different dogs, and I remember I used to run them up the mountain, out the back of our house. And it was quite a variety of performance from the dogs, because we had a few very fit. We had I think it was like a Whippet mix, and we had a bull terrier, and we had a old German French pointer, and the pointer was just so old, so she'd try and keep up for maybe the first bit of it, but then she would just end up, as once she'd done enough, she would just slow down and start walking, and maybe she'd find a shady tree and sit under it until the rest of us came back and picked her back up on the way back. But it was quite enjoyable memories for me, and you can definitely create those enjoyable memories yourselves or for your children. Alright, let's move on to the discussion. The odds of dog owners meeting current physical activity guidelines were 4 times greater than for non-dog owners. This difference of fourfold is more marked than differences reported in other countries with ratios of 1.6. The researchers' findings are striking when compared to a meta-analysis of typical physical activity interventions in adults, which have an effect size of 0.2 across a variety of self-reported and objective measures of physical activity. That equates to only 500 steps per day. Whereas this study also suggests that children who own dogs report greater participation in recreational walking and free time physical activity, playtime. Given that dog owners did not appear to have lower participation in other forms of physical activity compared to non-owners, the researchers' findings suggest that adult dog owners' increased recreational walking is contributing additional activity rather than replacing other activity. In fact, this data suggests dog owners are also more likely to participate in jogging or running without a dog than non-owners. Dog owners were less likely to report walking for transport than people without a dog, in line with previous studies. However, this was more than compensated for by additional recreational walking. The novel approach in this analysis elucidates that it is increased frequency of recreational walks rather than considerably greater walk duration, explaining the principal effect of dog ownership on physical activity levels. These findings are important because guidelines recommend that activity should be frequent to break up periods of sedentary behavior, such as sitting, and also undertaken in bouts of at least 10 minutes or more. Walking with a dog appears to be an effective strategy for facilitating this type of physical activity. The data from this study confirms that people who own a dog but do not walk it are much less physically active than both dog walkers and non-dog owners. Only 10% of the owners reported no walking with their dog, compared to 22% in an Australian study using similar methodology and 30% in an American study, which likely contributes to the greater differences in odds of meeting physical activity guidelines. Another American study found that only 30% of dog owners walked their dog for at least 150 minutes per week, compared with 65% in the current study. The researchers conclude that dog walking is more important to the physical activity levels of the United Kingdom community than in other countries, but a proportion of dog owners who do not walk are pervasive. This group also has very low levels of physical activity overall. Further research is required in order to understand why and if anything can be done to facilitate their participation in dog walking. Qualitative research into barriers and motivators to dog walking suggests it may be due to owner perception of owner or dog health capabilities. However, looking at the small amount of data here, non-dog walkers perhaps have a tendency to be female, under 30 years, working, of normal weight, and self-perceived very good health. This study has considerable strengths over previous research. They combine self-report with validation using objective measures of physical activity in a standardized population living in the same area, and provided novel contextual information into the types of walking and physical activity done both with and without a dog. Analysis methods were appropriate for interpretation of skewed outcomes. They also collected data from multiple household members, including children, and adjusted for clustering in their analyses, demonstrating the feasibility of this approach. Thus, the reliability of the researchers' findings is likely to be robust. However, the main limitation of this study is reliance on mainly self-report data, although validated measures, which could overestimate activity levels. Findings also need to be confirmed in a larger sample and other populations. In particular, the accelerometry and child sample sizes were small. Studies of dog walking should collect both self-report and objective, as accelerometry provides an objective measure of physical activity, while self-report provides more information on the context, such as walking for transportation or recreation. Furthermore, as technology develops, accelerometry could be combined with locational data such as GPS in order to also assess distance traveled. Finally, longitudinal studies are required to confirm causation, that dog acquisition results in increased physical activity, and that other activities are not replaced by dog walking. In conclusion, this study provides new evidence that United Kingdom dog owners are considerably more active than people without a dog, and that dog walking is undertaken in addition to and not instead of other physical activities. This study is a cross-sectional in nature and cannot confirm that a dog causes people to be more active, although there is a small amount of longitudinal data that will support this. However, the effect of dog ownership on physical activity levels in the United Kingdom appears to be greater than other countries' studies. These findings provide support for the role of pet dogs in promoting and maintaining positive health behaviors such as walking. Without dogs, it is likely that population physical activity levels would be much lower. Dog walking is also significant for wider health, as physical activity undertaken outdoors and in natural environments has the greatest mental health benefits, and also increases social capital through encouraging interactions in local community. Therefore, our pet dogs play an important role in keeping us healthy, and this should be recognized and facilitated. However, this should not be interpreted as a recommendation for people to go out and get a dog purely for their own benefit. Dog welfare needs must be carefully considered. These findings should instead be used to justify the provision of dog-supportive environments for walking and pet-friendly housing. Failure of planning and policymakers to provide these may significantly damage population levels of physical activity. Findings should also be used to promote interventions to increase and maintain dog walking, as even though many owners reported significant walking with their dog, there is still potential to increase this further. I hope you all enjoy this article, and actually, I have quite a few dog and physical activity studies tucked away in a folder, so if this episode gets a positive response, we might be starting a new theme on how dogs affect physical activity and exercise. Thank you everyone for listening. Please visit our sponsor at eliteform.com, and please help support us on Patreon. Thank you.